Hello, Tom LaVecchia here with the latest edition of the New Theory podcast. Today we have a and he's going to get three very special guests. John Viola of the Italian American podcast. As a podcaster, I'm usually doing podcasts, but I very rarely have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. It's just the way it crumbles. But I'm a big fan of the Italian American podcast, and I'm a big fan of John Viola. Welcome to New Theory Podcast. How are you doing today, John?
It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to jumping in. I love that we're live and not edited. This is great.
That's right, not edited and live to tape. So, John, let's start off with So you wear a lot of hats. You do a lot of great things we're going to get into. But let's talk about like your formative years. Where'd you grow up and kind of what makes you you?
That's a great question. I grew up. I left Brooklyn as a little kid. My family left our little Italian enclave in Williamsburg. Went to a small town in the middle of Jersey called Chatham, which was
Chatham.
Yeah.
I'm in Scotch Plains.
Oh, so it's the only town in Jersey that Italians couldn't find. It was like it's like some magical Irish map that
Meanwhile, it's all Main Street. Like what Main Street connects everything. But yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you can go. Like I didn't know growing up. I felt like an alien because we were the only Italian family in town, and then like two towns over was basically Little Italy. But I grew up there and always wanted to get back to Brooklyn in the city. So when I got out of high school, I came back up to Fordham in the Bronx, and I've been back in the city ever since.
Nice. One thing I like about the Bronx, and we'll get into Italian neighbors in a little bit. And now talk about Little Italy in the Bronx, which is still decent. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
But I like Morris Park, Pelham. I actually think that the Bronx Italian neighborhoods are probably some of the strongest Italian neighborhoods in the country.
I was just saying that to my brother yesterday, actually. We were having a conversation just about that and saying how somehow Arthur Avenue's had a real blessing in that, like, as people moved out, they didn't move, far away from the neighborhood. So they're in Morris Park, or they're in Pelham, or they're in Westchester and other parts of the Bronx. So it's still kind of their Main Street. Yeah. And the vendors are all, many people do live in the area. So yeah, I would say it's definitely one of the healthiest real Italian neighborhoods in the country. And my wife is from up there. She's from not far from Morris Park. So that's kind of her, enclave. And I spent a lot of great years there. It's a great place.
So here's an important question. Is Riverdale part of the Bronx?
On paper it is. I don't know. It feels like a different city plopped in the middle of the Bronx somewhere. Yeah.
Love it. All right. So I want to go through, because you wear a lot of different hats. I think that's a compliment, but I also, for people who don't know you, to probably discover you in the podcast, I want to build this up a little bit. So, and I love it because you're downplaying. Well, I'm just he's a big deal, guys. So, give us like your professional track, what you kind of did professionally, and then how did you kind of tie in and start to get into Italian American activities?
Sure. I at Fordham, I studied sociology and anthropology, which I really thought I was going to be Indiana Jones. Then I realized that's 99% of your time in the library instead of out in the dirt. And I'm dyslexic, so I didn't want to spend 99% of my time in the library. So I graduated and I ended up, believe it or not, going back to my neighborhood in Brooklyn. I had some friends of the family who were starting a little nonprofit, and their goal was to sort of, help education in the area and neighborhood community leadership, whatever. And so I came on board, and I had designed a program we called Passport to Brooklyn, where we would take kids from first, third, and what the heck was it? It was so long ago. I think first, third, and fifth grade, or fifth grade, eighth grade, whatever it was, a couple of years. And we would tie their curriculum into different cultural institutions in the area, so museums and the like. And then we'd do these trips, and we'd integrate it in the classroom before and after. And it got me into this nonprofit business and this idea of cultural nonprofit work. And so from there, I bounced around. I stood there, built a couple other programs for a while. I took an opportunity to work in Texas for about a year.
Oh, wow.
Worked in LA for a year on a really weird movie, which is a great, learned a lot there. And then when I came back, I was working in fundraising for Catholic education.
Okay.
And the opportunity came up at NIAF at the National Italian American Foundation in DC. I'd been a member my whole life, and they were looking for an executive director. And I got very lucky. I really pushed. I was only 28, and they hired me. So I went down and spent 6 years. Was planning on spending a year. I ended up spending 6, and and from there, I just became a professional Italian American. I mean, everything else that I do now, it sort of fell from the fact that I was so active in the community constantly.
I love it. Now, it's funny because we were talking earlier. I was going to ask you, but let me wait till we get on camera. So this is a question I think of, and I think Instagram fostered this and social media and stuff. I kind of have a feeling that let me give context. In the past, we kind of, Italian Americans came over, and it's kind of funny. I joke around and say, you tell me where your family moved to, I'll tell you where they're from. If you're from Brooklyn, you're probably Italian.
Yeah.
From Newark, you're Calabrese. If you're
Yeah.
Elizabeth, you're from Napoli. Like different things, right? But so in the beginning, I don't know about you, but for me, it seemed like to be normal to be an Italian American, right? We had family and friends and that kind of stuff. And then as we kind of assimilated, I call it the 3-hop. There's kind of where your family moves first, which is, could be a not great area in terms of economics, great in terms of nice, like the Bensonhursts and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Ours is Elizabeth, New Jersey. Then we grew up in Roseville Park. We grew up in Roseville Park, and it was a great area and stuff. But then, I went to school, made a few bucks, and then they moved over to Scotch Plains. I call it the 3-hop, right? That a lot of hopefully successful immigrant families go through. But it was normal to be Italian American, normal to be around Italian Americans. As I got older, which is a good thing, and as I got acclimated to society, I found myself kind of gearing away from the culture, gearing away from stuff. And I would never, ever, ever eat out at an Italian restaurant because my mother was like, hey, this, hey, why would you eat that at home? Why would you eat that out when you eat that at home? We brought her Angelo's and Italy once. She had a heart attack when she saw raviolis were $17. I was speaking to the choir on this one. What I'm getting at is when my mother passed, and again, you get older, you have a family and stuff. I kind of personally got away from a lot of it. So now I'm getting nostalgic, almost like collectibles, right? In a way that I feel with social media, people like me have an appetite for Italian American culture, Italian American content. I feel the pendulum is swinging back, but you're the expert. So that's why I long a question. Are you seeing the pendulum swing back, or it's still not there yet where you'd like to see more activity amongst younger Italian Americans?
It's a great question. I don't think it's a pendulum so much. I think, we talk a lot on the show about this move that people talk about trying to preserve or protect or save our heritage. But the truth of the matter is, and, from coming from an anthropologist's background, culture's fluid. So there is no such thing as preserving, right? You can't ossify your culture because the social conditions aren't there. The economic conditions aren't there. But what I think is happening now is, and you're right, there's sort of that 3-part bounce, which really in many ways mirrors that we are primarily now a generation that's kind of a community that's kind of 3 generations removed from the immigrant experience. And, Pat always likes to say, my co-host Pat, just so many people ran away from their background. Either they had to, or, that this was the promised land. This is what they were shooting for. And it's the generation that kind of got the taste of it, and then it disappeared when grandma and grandpa died or parents died, that understands that in turning backwards, yes, we live in a collectible society, and I'm a big collector. So I'm totally understand the idea that you kind of want to build the set, right? Okay, this is what someone does with the identity. I got to wear this or that. Right. It's a whole kind of new tribalism, I think, that we're falling into as a society, particularly with the social media, where you can find your tribe so easily and reaffirm the tenets of it. So right. I think with Italian Americanism, our tribe, the kind of check marks of what makes you a member are available right on your phone. People can see oh yeah, you see a meme and you go, yeah, I remember grandpa used to hang the sausages like this. And so it's available. It's easy to digest and get access to. Correct. And I think people are also seeing, the further we move in the world away from the old model, the more naturally desirous we are of the safety and security that immigrant sort of culture gave us. I mean, I look at not to go on a tangent, but I look at friends of mine who are not Italian or married not Italian, or even family members, and they have their kids, and they're freaking out and reading every book, and they're like, okay, well, it says I got to do this and that, and I think to myself, I never saw my mom do that. I never saw the women in my family who are Italian American, because grandma's there or mom's there, and you lived in the same tenant, so you passed on by osmosis all of these things that made life very secure. Correct. You break that chain. I think it's natural to. It's even more than nostalgia. I think it's a reevaluation of the values, and you go back and you try to help evolve them forward.
Interesting. So So because and one thing I really like about you and your podcast is and you know, again, we always say, like, you know, our parents are Italian or grandparents are Italian. You and I are Italian American, and like my children are American Italian. Right? It just is what it is, right? It's a
Yeah.
transition. And not to put silos up, but just kind of a designation, if you will. But one of the things I found interesting is you cover a lot of Italian topics, which I love. But one of the things I found interesting when I first went to Italy about 20 some years ago, I mean, I've been there many times, but one time that stuck out was I was 17 years old, and I said, "Hey, wait a second. Like in America, like my parents or my mother are strict, and like you have all these rules and that kind of stuff. And then you go to Italy, and they're like, oh, go on without they like, oh, we
Yeah.
all these different things, like living together before marriage, and like
Yeah.
like they're super progressive. Like you're thinking in New York City, and I'm kind of sitting there like, oh, wait a second, like did like we encapsulate the 1970s soprano-ish type culture of like whatever that I don't mean soprano, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
old school Italian culture, and that got like stunted and stayed, didn't grow, and then Italy kind of flourished. Give me that dichotomy because I'd love your take on
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think first of all, I think for immigrant groups, it's very normal that you come to a new place, and for Italian Americans, yes, we followed on the heels of Germans and Scandinavians and Irish in terms of our immigrant wave, but in truth, we were so much more other than those other groups. Like the Irish, yeah, they were Catholic, they got abused, but at least they spoke English, and the
it. Yeah,
Scandinavians
yeah,
were also Protestants, and they fit in and they looked Anglo-Saxon. So for here comes this big olive horde, and we came in gigantic numbers, like we would do to anything like a family Christmas.
right.
We come in this huge number, we're a different religion, we look different, we eat different, everything is different. So this idea of enclaving for safety, you start to take things that in your home country
Yeah,
would be trends, they become permanent anchors of your whole life system, because in that safety you have to just recreate them. So Italy evolved, and of course, yes, Italy evolved at a pace way different than anywhere else after the war. I mean, you think about the fact that after World War II, you really finally get the spread of Rai radio, and then television booms. There was anthropological studies in towns in Sicily, and I'm not kidding, where they found an old guy. I guess I don't remember what year, probably 1940 something. So he was probably in his 90s. He didn't even know Italy had unified as a country. I said to him, something about l'Italia, and he said, "Who's l'Italia? The Queen?" Like, in some of these towns, you didn't even get newspapers. So
yeah,
this place explodes, and for us, I think holding on to an old-fashioned mindset was about keeping. You have to keep every component together to
yeah,
keep alive your identity, I think. And so I think and that's every community. Like you look at the Dutch community in upstate New York, they've been here since the 1600s. People from the Netherlands, which is a completely libertine country, they say they come to that community and they're like, what the hell? Like, it's like a time machine for them,
yeah. And how about maybe let's look at a macro view? Because I remember, again, this is multiple times being in Italy, both small towns. You have the País, and like you say, hey, who went to Venezuela? Who went to Argentina? Who went to Canada? And interesting enough is, and decently well traveled. I know you're super well traveled. I kind of feel that, let's say, Italian Americans, not Italian North Americans, Italian Americans, may be less connected to Italy than, say, Italian Canadese, the Venezuelan, Argentinian, ergo speak the language usually more
Yeah.
often. The fashion, the culture, they seem more in tune. If you agree with that, that's great. If not, I understand. But give us what your thoughts are and why is that?
No, you're completely right. I think, well, first of all, in 1924, the U.S. government passed its first legislated quotas on immigrant groups, and like everything good about the Italian American experience, we were the first ethnic group, ourselves and the Jews, legislated against numerically. So they put these caps on how many people could come in. They actually highlighted Southern Italy over Northern Italy, and at that point, our immigration was a Southern Italian immigration. So the doors, these millions and millions of people that were coming over the years. I mean, a quarter of the Southern population came between
Yeah.
1870 and 1920. They just closed down those doors. So you had a real trickle. And eventually, and it was reopened a little bit. But so in the post-war years, the people that left Italy in gigantic numbers yet again, if they did migrate north to northern Italy for jobs, okay. If not, they ended up in Canada, Australia, which had no Italian community to speak of prior to the war.
Yeah.
Now, up until Mandarin passed it 2 or 3 years ago, was the second most spoken language on the island. South Africa, and then Venezuela, a little bit more in Argentina. They got a second wave. They had an early wave, and Brazil. So I think, when Italians did come here in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and whatever numbers were allowed, they had this very significant, very well established, burgeoning community in those years that they could assimilate forward into and become American. Those who went to the Canadas and the Venezuelas, there were obviously small pockets of Italian communities that were long-standing there, but not big enough to become a part of it. So they just had a much more isolated later immigrant experience. So I think that's a reason why they hold. And of course, when they did come in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s till today, that was an era when it was much easier to communicate with Italy. Go back and, you could watch Italian television. You got Rai here. When our ancestors came in the 1890s, you're lucky you got a newspaper, and most of them never went back. These people went back every summer. So they formed their Italo whatever identity in a much more globalized modern world.
Interesting. No, you nailed it, because that makes sense. Because if there's a pocket already established, you'll go into that pocket. If there's not, you'll isolate around that pocket, create a new pocket.
Yeah.
And probably have greater tentacles back home. So there's a few things I want to check, because I was super excited about this podcast, because I just feel like there's a lot of again, I don't want to do like the stereotypical, well, the culture's being lost, blah blah blah. No, but what I'm getting at is kind of being, I guess, reinvented, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the trends you're seeing now in the Italian American community specifically? Because again, we're gonna assume our listeners are educated, and like we're gonna go past the whole like, wow, we're losing our culture and assimilating. Well, that's gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
But given that, what are some of the newer and realer trends that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, I've noticed, I started at the National Italian American Foundation in 2012, January 2012. So for me now, I'm 8 years in, almost 9, where this has been my whole life.
Yeah.
So I notice in that 8 years in particular, first and foremost, a huge explosion, just like every other community, in genealogy and storytelling. So the idea of studying, real genealogy, or spit tube DNA tests, which I have my reservations about, that's booming. Family trees, that kind of stuff. In complement in Italy, especially now with the political turmoil in the country and sort of both sides being dissatisfied, there's a huge trend in dual citizenship. Italy's one of the few countries that allows it. And, if you would have said that 10 years ago, most people thought it was illegal for a U.S. citizen to hold both. Now it's acknowledged that it's fine. So you're seeing big numbers there, people who are applying for the dual citizenship. I see a lot of the sort of lost, I want to say, artisanal behaviors and trends. Like we did a poll last year, I guess beginning of 2020, or end of 2019. And we got about 1,600 respondents, and we asked a lot of questions. And I thought we'd see trends like, nobody makes wine anymore and nobody jars tomatoes. Those numbers were shockingly high. Now, maybe it's a home field of our audience, but I think a lot of that stuff is being reclaimed in conjunction with just a general movement towards slower food. And, we do that stuff really well. I always say one thing about Italian Americans, like we're living in a world that's alarmingly post-human. But our people are really good at being human. We value family, the table, good food, jarring it and preparing it and putting the time in. Yeah, my father-in-law's from Italy. I watch him slice a cabigola that he made. It's like he's making love to it. He's so excited. He's so happy. Yeah. So I think a lot of those trends are there. And I think another one that's really interesting that I'm watching is because of the internet and because of this tribalization where you could find your group. I see a lot of people studying what many would call dialects. We on the show call regional languages. So like, it's not yes, you could study Italian, but with an app or a website like iTalki, you can also study with a Neapolitan or a Sicilian or a Calabrese speaker. People are making that option, and I think that's really great.
Yeah. Now, in your travels and in your kind of formation, having Italian American podcast and that kind of stuff. Now, in New York, well, now it's a little different, but in New York, you actually had a lot of Italian expats, and generally are from Northern Italy,
Yeah.
and generally are well-to-do, and maybe not as entrenched in the Southern American culture, but nevertheless Italian. Have you, in your travels, have they kind of come into the fold in terms of, your organizations and that kind of fun stuff, or is that kind of like they're just kind of kept separate because there's always a divide between the North?
Yeah. Well, I love that we're live to tape here because I'll give you the honest answer because I don't. It's interesting. We get a lot of modern expats who participate. Oftentimes they want to tell us how to better be Italian, right? So, well, like, no, you cannot put these cheese. I'm like, no, listen, we don't like, we are a branch of a tree. We're not like an isolated community trying our best to copy Italy, which as much as I love Italy, there's a reason people leave.
Correct.
So, I try to bridge that gap with people by saying, look, nowadays more than ever, and Italians didn't speak English really until 20 years ago, if that. So it's like, okay, we got more opportunities to get to know one another. Instead of coming here and criticizing our version of food and telling us why it's not Italian food, understand that we're not in Italy. We're free people. We have every opportunity. We could have moved back. We're happy here. So this is an Italian community, as distinct as a Sicilian culture is from Piedmontese culture. We're just a different branch of that tree. So they participate. Oftentimes it's a little bit like somebody set you up on a date where like everything on paper matched, but then that date's just like a little awkward, and you're like, all right, we kind of fit on paper, but it's just not. And sometimes it's great. There's a lot of Italian expats who come over and love the Italian community. There's other ones who just don't want to be involved, I guess.
That's a great analogy. I remember I was in Germany and I heard some people speaking Italian, and I don't know. I mean, to this day, even like I still get excited like when I hear Italian spoken.
Yeah.
And I'm like that butter in her. I'm like, hey, like, that's okay. It's not great, and definitely embedded with a lot of dialect. But I'm super excited, And they're like, oh, dove sei? And then I'm like, oh, we're from Provincia Avellino, and they're like, like they were like, no, like this, like, and I hate to say this, but like, if it's almost like as soon as I said we were from like Southern Italy, I got picked up on it too. Because it's weird when you speak Italian sometimes as a second generation, you almost have like the drawl of the dialect.
Oh, you do? Yeah, you do.
So like picked up on it, and like we had like a minute conversation. Like you see, like so like we were from Southern Italy, so like we weren't worth their time, but yeah, so I definitely know there's like a dichotomy. It's always interesting. I still get super excited. I get excited about Italian American stuff. I try to get involved. I kind of want to flip the script a little bit before we conclude because I think this is important. I had a gentleman on. His name is Lorenzo. He has a modern day Italian. He goes to Italy. He like tries food and trying to connect like the old and new, similar to what you're doing on a smaller scale. But he's getting there, So one of the things we talked about is a lot of stuff going on, a lot of racial issues with this the country, and I'm a pretty transparent guy. I think you are too. Like I think it's easier for us to acclimate because of our skin color, right? Sure. Like we're white. We don't. It's funny. We don't, as Italians, we don't always think of ourselves as white, and people don't always think of us as white. But in terms of, I guess, genealogy, we're white, right? So it's easier for us to acclimate, right? And then, maybe you get the joke or somebody curses a little bit more at you when they hear your last name. Like I dealt with that my whole life. I get all that, but I don't think I'm losing out on jobs. I don't think I'm losing out on stuff, right? However, with the African-American community, and I think their melanin is a blessing, not a curse, that the African-American community is still having a rough go, and I think it's because of skin color. And I always say that 3 hop, I think they get their first hop, but they don't always get that second hop. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of times it's harder for them to get their third, right?
Sure.
My question is, as Italian Americans, and you brought up earlier that we were discriminated against, we did have a rough go, we battled through it. Do we have any responsibility, or maybe responsibility might be the working word I'll go with, to maybe help out? Because not that we made it, not that we're running around like rainbows and unicorns, but we're doing okay, right? We're not missing meals, right? So my question is, as the Italian American community, should we kind of work to help the African American community because we've kind of been there, we're acclimated, so we can like, not that we don't have our own struggles.
Yeah.
I think like, should the Italian American community help out the African American community because of our heritage and because we feel like, hey, you know what, maybe we can help out more in some way? Like, do you feel your responsibility to that, and if so, what is it?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, part of what you're describing is, and something that I encounter a lot because, you know, there's so many different opinions in the community, just the a baseline of should we be empathetic? You know what I mean? Like I oftentimes find it interesting when Italian Americans rally against immigration because I'm like, wait a minute, you know, this the sense of close the door behind you baffles my mind, blows my mind.
Correct.
And, you know, great Italian American sociologist, pundit, thinker, Mike Barone wrote a couple of wonderful books. One of them, he compares the social trajectory of different groups, and in it, you know, he says basically like if you studied the Jewish social experience here, you can learn a lot about what the Asian community is doing, and if you study the Irish one, you can learn about the African Americans. And he said if you study the Italians, you'll learn a lot about what's going on with Hispanics. Yeah. And I always felt like if there are similarities and differences in any group, we owe it to this country and all that it's given us, whether that was hard earned or not. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of discrimination. I remember as a kid the things people would say in a town that had no Italians, and it was you know just discouraging. But like you said, I'm not hungry, and I never lost a job. And if somebody didn't hire me because they didn't like the vowel on the end of my name, it wasn't systematic. It was just a personal asshole. So, you know, I think we owe it to the country to say, look, we had a really hard time here. We can acknowledge that, and we can share that with, you know, it's not complaining to talk about how hard it was, but we've done well despite that. We obviously have achieved economically, socially. You know, you become white in this country when either A, you have nothing else to be, or they need you, right? Like I think they needed the Italians for statistical numbers. So like, okay, they're white now too. I grew up thinking I was olive. A white guy was somebody who had Wonder Bread sandwiches. I was not a white guy. Anybody else who's a minority group that's less assimilated than us will say, no, listen, buddy, you're a white guy. And they're not wrong. So I think, you know, we owe it to examine our successes, our strengths, weaknesses, the way we did it, for best practices, if nothing else. We owe that. But on the African American question, I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Because I never thought of myself as a person I've never thought of myself as a racist person, but, you know, I'm talking about Columbus and stuff, and then you get people saying you're a racist if you defend Columbus, or you're this or that. And so part of my reaction to this whole thing in the wake of George Floyd has been, every time I hear a story about African Americans, I try to really pause, empathetically replace the word African with Italian, and reread the story or re-listen. And I think I've come to a lot of realizations. Part of the problem is we live in such a sensitive world. Like, what does help even mean, right? Like everybody's out there screaming, make your screen black and repeat this line that I said and go to this protest and donate to these 5 charities. And if you do that, you're okay. If you don't do anything, you're bad. And if you do something else, like, you don't want to be paternalistic. So what do? You know, how do you say to a black guy, hey, let me tell you from my experience without looking like a white asshole? You know? It's tough. It's really tough. I mean, empathy to me is the key. But yeah, I think there are a lot of things that people can learn from our social experience for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, no, that was a well thought out answer, and it seems like you probably have been pensing about it, as have I, because I think about what can I do and how can we do more. So so you're a busy dude, man. So like, you know, Italian American, you know, listen, we talked earlier, guys, when you listen to a podcast, listen to it its entirety. It's a labor of love. It's not an economic concern.
No,
it's just not. So give us, you know, why did you take over the podcast, and give us, you know, what direction you went and where do you want to go?
So I left NIAF when I got married, and, you know, I kind of felt like I had run my course there. I didn't want to be in DC. My wife would not move. My wife's a hard-headed Italian girl from the Bronx. She was not coming to DC. So I said, okay, you know, I did my time. And I really intended to go and work like a normal person. And the co-founders, Dolores and Anthony, who had run the show from 2005 to I guess 2018, 19, whatever, became good friends of mine. They came to me when I was at NIAF looking for some support, and we partnered with them and did a lot of work together. And they had both had different career trajectories where, like you said, it's a labor of love, and there was no income for it. So they just couldn't, they had such a great success off the bat and they couldn't keep it up.
Yeah.
And they were down to, I guess, usually-ish 2 episodes a month, if that. And I said, guys, you got a great opportunity here. This is a wonderful platform. Let me bring together my round table of characters and we'll do a show every other week and you do one. And it just sort of became clear that somebody needed to make this a business.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the time to do it. And I had the time. And so we made a deal like last July and finally made the switch over and merged the companies together. And so from that point on, I've sort of been amongst the other stuff I do in the Italian American community and in business, this has been sort of the central thematic hub, the show. And, so like the T-shirts and merchandise that we sell goes through the show. And then now we're doing videos and we've hired staff on video production and that sort of cycles through. And everything we're building at least has a home on the show. So it's kind of our weekly check-in, I guess.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and I think COVID might accelerate this, is I do think, what are they called? Italiophiles?
Yeah, Italiophiles.
Italian products, right? So you have the Italian Americans who want stuff from Italy, and then you have the Americans that are Italiophiles that like love everything Italian. And with COVID, it's kind of going to be decentralized, and then Italian communities, you're not going to be able to go to the butcher store and stuff. So I'm thinking like, and obviously part of your strategy, I would guess, is I can imagine that there are Italian brands, whether it be a bit of La Pasta, Nutella, whatever, that would want to kind of partner with you and get access to your group, because like it's harder to get access now because like everything is decentralized. Yeah. And number two, there's more of an appetite for it. So I kind of see in a weird way that I think you're ahead of the curve. And let's be honest, John, when you started the podcast, what, 2 years ago, whatever it was, when you kind of partnered with them, podcasting wasn't as accepted. Now, like Joe Rogan has made it like the norm. So I see like big things happen for you there, and you always have new theory as a friend. So we're gonna conclude because we want to learn a little bit more about you. Some questions for you, and I know you probably have opinions on each of these things, but let's ask anyway. Favorite movie? I think all Italian American related stuff. So obviously.
Yeah. Favorite Italian American movie? That's really tough. It might be. It's gonna sound like it's out of left field. It might be Moonstruck, actually.
Oh wow! That's
a
good movie.
Yeah.
Favorite Italian restaurant inside New York, and then anyone outside of New York.
All right, home field in New York. I gotta say, Bamonte's in
I always wanted to Brooklyn. I always wanted to go old school. I've been wanting to go there.
Well, they're compati of my family, so when this is over, we'll go and we'll have a nice meal there. That's like total home field for me. Outside of New York, gosh, that's a great question, man. I like old school red sauce joints. Yeah. I don't like modern Italian restaurants that I'd rather eat at home. Correct. So it's really, for me, it's the environment that I'm going for. Yeah. I just had a quarantine mask distance dinner with some buddies. We have a club called Waglio, and it's upstanding gentlemen of legitimate Italian origins. And we try to do meals. We just ate at Belmont Tavern. My first time at Belmont Tavern.
Oh my God! Did you get the chicken Murphy?
We had chicken everything. Tony Manja, who's a friend of he ordered everything. It was fantastic. I have to say, I was blown away by how good the food was.
Yeah, and it's cash only. Yeah. Like she yells at you, like they get annoyed at you, and like it's like you're at your grandmother's house, but like on a bad day, and they're just unapologetically who they are. That was a very good call. Like that was a good call. Okay, so you order pizza. What kind of pizza do you order for takeout?
Depends on the mood. Sometimes it's the new Neapolitan stuff. Yeah. I like Sicilian. My mom's Sicilian. I like Sicilian pie. Yeah. I like a New York slice. I could eat pizza every day. I could 3 meals a day. I'd be the happiest guy in the world.
That's me for sure.
But nothing on it though. I don't like toppings on my pizza.
Love it. And then last question is, what question didn't I ask you that you wish I did? That you wish I did?
That's a great. What question didn't you ask me that I wish you did? Yeah. Shit, that's tough. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think in those terms. I guess I don't know.
Yeah.
Do people usually have an answer for you for that? Is that like a standard? Yeah.
I don't say it every podcast, but when I do, people get thrown off. And
Good.
not that it's funny because I should do more PR. I should be on more podcasts. So like, but when I'm on a podcast sometimes, or I do PR, I once in a while think, ask me this, ask me this, ask me this, and then and you're like, you're leading it. You're like, hey, let's go here. Like if it sounds like what's that, and so sometimes and not even just that, maybe philosophically too. You might have been like, oh shit, why didn't you, I would have loved it if you brought up X or Y. So that's kind of why I bring it up. It's not really meant to, some people use it as an opportunity to plug. Oh, you forgot my
sure.
But I know you don't like that. But more conceptually, just wondering if I
it's great
or something that
I was actually so pleasantly impressed by the questions, the tonality that you had, and look, even delving into stuff like race relations in the country. I mean, we don't do enough of that. That's the thing. I mean, your show, New Theory, you get to go all over the place and interesting people and stuff. To do a show on just our community runs the risk of becoming very insular and ethnocentric. So, and then we try not to be political because half the audience is pretty liberal, half the audience is pretty conservative, and people are so tense and pissed off today that if you say anything, like we interviewed Rudy Giuliani before he seemed as crazy as he does now, and like a lot of people just wouldn't even listen to the episode. And I said I would interview Nancy Pelosi if I was in DC, but then everybody would hate me on that side. So it's like, so I thought you didn't ask me anything that I was hoping you would, but I was very pleased with the questions you brought. I can learn a lot from the professionalism.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's funny because I used to see. Are you a cigar guy? Because I saw a few pictures with cigars.
Once in a blue moon, yeah.
So I used to be more into cigars and you get worried about your health. So I used to go to Macanudo a lot, and that's where it was like Giuliani's home court. He had his, he actually met his wife. Well, his wife he just got divorced with. I was in pharmaceuticals, and it's not a super public story, but I'll say it anyway. So he had, cancer, I guess prostate cancer, and then the woman, I used to have a similar job. So she was a district manager for like a company, and then she obviously knew the doctor through the business relations. They met at Macanudo. It was kind of a setup. I think he might have been married. I don't know. I don't judge. It's not my business. And then they got married, and then very recently they got divorced. And then it's kind of funny because he kind of went, I think, a little bit off the rails after the divorce. Not even even before the divorce. And then a lot of this stuff happens. And one thing that concerns me though is like he's still, to me, is America's. I'm not gonna get some shit for this. To me, he's still America's mayor, right?
Yeah.
And then number two is he's still the guy who fixed New York.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm not the holder of his legacy. Who the hell am I?
Yeah.
But I tend to. It's one of those things. It's like the crazy uncle. Like I tend to. Hey, you know what? I still love you. I may not agree with everything Voltaire said. I may not agree with what you're saying, but I'll fight to the death for you to say it. So that's kind of where I stand on him. And that's the other thing too. And I know we're going a little over time, but one last question actually is, who are some of the Italian American people we should look up to nowadays? Because it's kind of few and far between.
Yeah, it's really tough. That's part of the assimilation process. Like I'll tell you one who I do look up to, and I'm blessed to have become really good friends with, is Mike Piazza. And one of the reason Mike comes up to me, first of all, if you're looking for Italian Americans to look up to, there's no more stand-up human being than that guy. He's a man of faith, values, family. Yep. Does everything with class. He gives of his time. I mean, he's just a phenomenal human being.
Well, except for being a man. I'm just kidding.
I agree. I'm a Yankee fan. I was actually the bat boy in the year we beat them in the World Series, and I always have that conversation. Yeah, because I was down on the first base line during the Clemens bat thing, and I saw it from a different angle because the cameras weren't on my angle, and him and I go back and forth about it a lot. But no, the reason I say him is because I say to him all the time, Mike, you got into the Hall of Fame. There will be other Italian Americans who get in the Hall of Fame. This guy Anthony Rizzo's really active in the community and stuff. But Mike may be the last guy who had people around the country rooting for him based on his last name as an Italian American. I mean, now you'll do it, and the Italian American part will be an afterthought. So, the Leonardo DiCaprio's and look, almost everybody's half Italian or quarter Italian anyway. Bradley Cooper's half Italian. Yep. Captain America's half Italian. Right. Looking up to them we are assimilated, so we look up to our own heroes. But I think looking up to people as heroes for the community, what they do, their involvement, whether, do they look out for the community? They represent it well. I think there's a lot of great people out there. I mean, I'm very impressed by a guy like Mike. I got to know the Russo brothers who directed Captain America and the Avengers. And when I was still at NIAF, they called me up and they said, we want to do a film forum program. And they put in 75 grand. We matched it, and they wanted to help young Italian Americans. I shouldn't say young, beginning Italian Americans starting out in their film business, no matter what. They wanted to be mentors. They wanted to support. So those are the kind of people that I look up to. I always say, like, I may not agree with the politics of a Rudy or a Nancy Pelosi or anybody, but I got to look at them. I'm a professional Italian American, and I do want to know what they did for their community and how they cared. And so that's where I go.
I always say that there should be like a pivot point, and if you're an Italian American, it should be part of the pivot or the center for that, and you're living that every day, John. So I'm going to put links to the show below, but for those listening and driving, John, how can we find the Italian American podcast?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. You can find us on our website, ItalianAmericanPodcast.com, which has all of our archive, or any of your favorite podcast players. We're on everything. And we have a YouTube channel as well, which I think you probably have to find through our website, because it's like Italian American Podcasts, IATV, whatever. And so we got a lot of really interesting stuff out there. So yeah, ItalianAmericanPodcast.com, and we're on all kinds of social media and stuff like that.
Love it. And if anybody's looking to follow you, should they follow those mediums, or do you brand yourself as well?
That's a great question. I fail to brand myself, I'm sure. I don't consciously. I have my own social media. I don't check it very often. But yeah, you can find me. I think I'm John_M_Viola at most things. And
yeah, that's I mean, I met you at the party a few years ago, at Cipriani, and then I think I started following. I guess you were brought up, whatever. And I'm following. I'm like, this guy is like the most low key guy ever. Like, guys, just like we didn't talk 10% over of what this guy has done. So maybe a Monty's over a little bit too much wine.
Yes.
Maybe we'll return on the recorder. And John, thank you for being on the New Theory podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure, Tom. I appreciate it.